Hi y'all, welcome back to another video. Today I wanted to talk about how you might best go about getting started with movement writing, aka Palmer method, muscular movement writing, business penmanship. It can go by quite a few different names. Historically, it was known mostly as business writing. And before I get into some of the techniques and my tips as far as getting started, I'd like to talk about why you might want to embrace this style of writing. It's not an easy thing to do, mainly because we have developed very strong habits for writing. But the main reason I think it's worthwhile is that if you write primarily by hand and you enjoy writing and would like to write more, this particular style and method for writing, I think, is one of the most ergonomically sound methods for writing. If we look back as to how it was used historically, prior to the introduction of the typewriter, business writing was used for business. There were colleges that revolved around teaching this skill for the purpose of business. And so you had professionals who would spend large portions of their day, maybe even up to 8 hours a day, handwriting documents for the purpose of business. Receipts, letters, invoices, etc. Now, if you want to write for that many hours in a day, you'll quickly find that the most common method for writing today, being finger movement, small joints and muscles in the hand are being stressed, you'll quickly find, even for myself, someone who writes multiple hours a week, that if I were to try finger movement writing, I can't go longer than maybe 10, 15 minutes, 20 minutes at most. And my hand will be hurting and I will be uncomfortable. And so this method of writing is extremely ergonomic and friendly towards the anatomy of the body. And there will be slight variations in your form than my form, because what you want to find is the most comfortable writing position for you. And then once you have found that, you will be able to apply the muscular movement involved in the actual production of writing. So a lot of people talk about the speed of writing that is recommended in the older books, all of the business writing books, and people think that they want to embrace this style of writing because it will help them write more quickly and because it will improve their ability to take notes in class or something like that. And I think if you want to capture a lot of information in a short amount of time, we already have a champion in that realm, and it's to type. It's not to handwrite at all. And there is no style of handwriting that will ever be comparable to typing. Now, on that note, I don't think that the value in taking notes by hand is capturing all of the information that is being given to you in a lecture. Rather, I think the most important part of handwriting, your notes, is the comprehension that takes place between the information entering your ear, entering your brain, and you processing that information into a handwritten note in your own words. So if you want to write by hand in class, that's why you want to do it. And you don't want to be concerned with writing quickly. You want to be concerned with writing things that will be valuable. At least that's how I took notes in college, and that's what I found to be most successful. I wrote big picture ideas down that helped piece all of the little picture stuff together for me. Okay, enough of that. Let's get on to how you might actually do this writing. So the first most important thing is that you need to be in a position that's comfortable. And you need to be sitting in a way that is ergonomically friendly. So you do want to be upright. You want to have a straight back for the most part. Your head can tilt down slightly towards the page so that you can see what you're doing. The other thing that's really important is the ratio of the chair to your table. You want to make sure that whichever chair you're using, that it is suited for the table, meaning that it is either high enough or low enough so that you can sit in a position where your arms can rest comfortably on top of the table. You don't want to be seated at a table that forces your shoulders to shrug upward, and you don't want to be too high above the table as to when you're sitting in an erect position, your arms kind of float over the table. You kind of want to find the perfect balance there. And I use a computer chair that can adjust itself up and down, and so that makes it easy to write at the tables that I have here available. Sometimes I see people will put big books on their chair so that they could sit a little bit more upright, but this is really important because otherwise you're not going to be in the most optimal position, and you're going to contort your body in some way that won't be ergonomically friendly and long-term won't benefit you. So if you manage to get to that position where you're sitting at your chair, you're sitting upright, your arms can rest comfortably on the table, where do you put your arms? Well, this will vary slightly between person to person depending on how big or small you are. Your arm might rest at the edge of the table with your elbow slightly off the edge, or you might be able to sit at a table with your arm entirely on the table. There's some graphics in the Palmer Method book that I think are helpful in finding the optimal position for your arms. If you stick your arms out in front of you and just allow them to drop on their own, they usually land in a position that's rather natural. And I've used that early in my practice to kind of find the optimal position. So maybe that will work for you as well. Here in this top-down view, you can kind of get an idea as to the placement of my arms. My right arm, which is my writing arm, is in line with the angle of the page. And my left arm is usually somewhere to the top side of the page or the left side of the page. One important note is that when you're writing and you have found your comfortable position, you don't want to move too much from it. Your writing arm almost never will need to leave the table. It stays planted where it is, and you will keep that consistent. Your left hand plays an important role because it's what's going to move your page around. It's going to allow you to move further along the line and further down the page. The left hand is also doing some important work in the weight distribution. So you don't want to put a ton of weight on your right arm. There's going to be some weight on that arm, but your left arm is also taking some of the weight. So this is a pretty fine balance, but it should come pretty naturally as you start to practice. Now, by far the most challenging part of this writing is that there is no finger movement used. And in the old books, all these books recommend that you write very fast. The drills will say something like 200 ovals a minute or something outrageous. And I think, my personal opinion, is that they set these almost unrealistically fast speeds to force you to use arm movement, because there's no way you could do it using finger movement. You can come close using arm movement though, and I'm certain there are some people who can definitely do it. I myself am not too concerned with the speed. For me, it's more important that I just get the movement right. And so you'll notice, and maybe you have already in my other videos, but I don't write particularly fast. So I wouldn't concern myself too much with the speed, but early on, the speed might help you and might force you to use more arm movement rather than finger movement. And so that will be your greatest challenge. We have a kind of a default mode network when it comes to writing. We have really strong neural pathways that have been developed, some of us for multiple decades. And to overcome that habit, you will need a lot of conscious effort to force your fingers to stay still and retrain your movement. It took me, I would say, about a month of a lot of conscious efforts to retrain movement and to also find a more comfortable grip. Hopefully the videos are demonstrating my grip. It's fairly relaxed. I don't buckle my index finger in at all. I have 3 points of contact between the index finger, the middle finger, and my thumb. And the pen, the tail of the pen rests somewhere between my knuckle and the knuckle of my thumb. So kind of higher up on that web between your thumb and your index finger. And the books say that your pen should be pointed back towards your shoulder. If that's a reference that's useful for you, you can use that as well. So again, you're going to have to constantly remind yourself early on that you don't want to use any finger movement whatsoever. You are simply holding the pen with your fingers, and I've intentionally used a ballpoint pen in this video because I want to demonstrate that you can start with any tools. You don't need a fancy dip pen or fountain pen. Honestly, I do a ton of writing with a Bic pen, and I think they're perfectly suitable for training movement early on. And so you'll spend some time invested in rewiring your movement for writing, and I think why waste money on fancy tools when you can just use a 99-cent pen and make the same sort of progress you might with the other tools. You probably make faster progress because the other tools can be a little bit cumbersome in preparation and all that. So let's talk a little bit about the placement of the arm and the grip of the pen. The points of contact on the page are the ring finger and the pinky down to the forearm. And there's really no other contact, explicit contact you want to have with the page. This should allow for minimal friction and should allow you to move freely. Let's look more closely at the forearm. When you plant your arm on the table, if you flex your knuckles back, you can feel the meat of your forearm really touching the table. That is the muscular movement. That is where your movement will pivot and flow from. So you can see here in these videos how the muscle is kind of rolling around on the table. Now my shoulder and my back muscles are the ones generating the movement. And the muscle of the forearm is there kind of as a limiter for the movement. So there's only so far that I can stretch upward and only so far that I can stretch downward. And then my elbow hinge is the lateral movement from side to side. So you should be feeling, as you write, kind of the rolling around on your forearm muscle. And you should be feeling your range of motion. Now, up until this point in you getting ready to write, you got your position right, you got your posture right, you got your arm placement, you're holding the pen correctly, you can feel the muscular movement in your shoulder, in your back, and the movement on the muscle of the forearm. Up until this point, you don't even need to write yet. And in fact, I think it benefits you to not think about the writing too much. I think what's important is sort of envisioning the body-mind connection that is taking place here. And I often practice imagining letter forms, trying to see them really well in my mind's eye, and trying to imagine perfect posture and placement of the arm and the fluidity of movement. And you might want to start practicing that way as well. I think it's beneficial. Now, when you actually start to put ink down on the page, I think what you want to do is you want to write bigger than you might expect to. Because this gross movement is still being developed, you will find it much easier to write larger than you will find it to write smaller. And with time, as you gain control over this new coordination, you will be able to fine-tune and work to a smaller, more conventional writing size. Okay, so that is the introduction.